Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this week's episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, please do comment, like, share, and ultimately subscribe. It will help us and help you to spread the light and help humanity and yourself grow accordingly. Also, I would like to introduce my newest book. It's called Planetary Citizens: Awakening the Heart of Humanity. It takes very complex topics and puts them in a very simple phraseology and understandable relationship orientation. And you can get that as a free download on planetaryscitizens.net. Now, this week's guest is Jennifer Jurkofsky, and she is an amazing woman we met through Beyond Being Human, which is a collective that is addressing the extraterrestrial presence and our relationships with them and the kinds of abilities and things that come, conversations basically that come from that, of the internal experiences of contact and what those are like. Uh, she is a registered psychotherapist in Canada, so she's perfect for that helpfulness. She has her own business called My Holistic Self, and she is also a podcast host for Twillow Talk, which is a podcast that relates to the very subject of the inner and outer relationships. So we're going to have an awesome conversation. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Explore the thoughtless sphere. Embark on a life-changing journey of self-discovery. Embrace harmony with self, with others, with Earth. One world in a new world. Zen Benefiel skillfully ignites conversations, guiding guests to reveal personal journeys and perspectives. Listeners are inspired to seek knowledge and find wisdom in their own lives. Join this transformative journey as we navigate the depth of human experience.
Jennifer, it's so great to have you here, and I really am looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm super excited for our conversation today. I know our previous ones have been absolutely amazing, and it can only grow from there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mentioned that we're bereft of understanding how to bridge these inner and outer worlds for the most part. Some know those are rare and few and far between. In that respect, I know that in order for you to have gone down the path that you have, there's had to have been some early understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. What was that like for you? How old were you, and what were the kinds of things that were going on in your life, and how was that accepted or rejected from those around you?
That is a great question. So, for me, from a very, very young age, I knew that there was more than what we see with our regular senses, more than what we think is there or what we're told, right? When we
Hmm.
come into this life, we get very conditioned very early on. And a big part of my process, because I could see things as a child, I knew that there was something more than what the rest of the world was experiencing. I wanted to know what that was about. And so I started to
Radical curiosity, eh?
absolutely. And that sent me on, all kinds of exploratory journeys and trying to figure out what was going on. Why was I having these dreams and then having them come true? Why was I seeing things in places where other people said there was nothing there? Why did I have these sensations that told me things were happening or to watch out for this or that? And nobody else around me was having those experiences.
Hmm. Well, it
And it
sounds like you were just really hypersensitive to the world around you. Um, and this is it's a rare occurrence. As children, I think most of us have that. And then it's kind of nurtured out of us in some way because parental understanding isn't there. And so there are these imaginary friends and so on and so forth, right? And as kids, we think it's all normal, so we don't really talk about it.
Mhm.
How did you first figure out that? okay, there's something else going on here, and maybe I need a little help in trying to understand it.
Yeah, maybe not the typical kid. I talked about it.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so that,
Awesome.
yeah. And as a child, my mom would say, yeah, I see stuff too. So it was kind of normalized in that
Hmm.
way. But it was, some of the stuff was not pleasant and not something that I wanted to see or experience. And as much as my mom, was able to say, yes, okay, I see that as well, there wasn't really any support or understanding as to what to do with it or how to navigate it. So I did get to a point where I said, I don't really want to see any of this right now. I
Right.
don't
Well,
know
it's
how
like,
to.
you think, um, gosh, it would be so cool to read people's minds, right? And then that opportunity is like, whoa, wait a minute. No, I don't want this.
No, what is in your mind is none of my business, and I like it that way. Absolutely.
So in those moments when you were, working with your awareness and how, as when do you when did you notice that there was this ability that you had that was also shared by your mother and that it was quite unique in the overall scope of society at the time?
Yeah, I think to what you were saying though, with the child piece and not really knowing, I would talk about it and friends would talk about imaginary friends and all of that. And so I didn't think very much of it being different in that way, other than not everything I saw was my friend.
Mm.
Right. And so there was that piece, but it wasn't really, I would say, until I was much older and I started to explore all of the different belief systems. And I wanted to really deep dive into what was going on and what I was experiencing, that I had my aunt, who also has experiences and all of that, come into my life and say, I think I was about 12 or so at the time, and say, yeah, this is different. This isn't something that everybody experiences. And started to help me navigate that a little bit
Hmm.
better. Still not very open to it at that point because I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to.
Right. At those ages, the socialization, we just want to fit in. We want to have fun and fit in.
Exactly. And at that age, I don't understand that this is something unique and special or a gift of any kind. And so again, that piece of I don't want to do anything with this or understand this or navigate this at this point in my life. And through my own, I always still longed for more. That
Hmm.
was never an issue. I would start going to church and I would try to, I went to the mosque, I went everywhere because I wanted to know what the more was, right?
Sure.
What else is
Well, and
this?
those are the areas of exploration that were available, right? At that time, I mean, there is some age difference with us, but still, there wasn't a whole lot of esoteric realms or organizations available. Most of it was organized religion of some form, whether it was Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Islamic, Zoroastrianism, right? All those different, Taoist and all of those kinds of things. And yet, did you find a congruence or some golden thread throughout them all that you could identify?
Absolutely. But that came later.
Hmm.
Yeah, it actually took,
Well,
I
it does
ended.
take time. We almost we're so impatient and we want things right now, especially in the West. In
Mhm.
the East, not so much. In the West, though, it's McEnlightenment, right? It's like drive through, pick up your stuff and go. Doesn't work that way. It's a maturation process.
No, and what really has come in terms of this unified thread that's gone through all of it is something that the mind doesn't necessarily like to hear.
Mm.
And it's definitely something that the Western mind doesn't like to hear. This idea that we have to take a step back and we have to step out of the mind and into the heart, allow ourselves to connect to the oneness that is there through all things, And it's through that connection and surrender to that connection that we actually open to all possibility.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what I find interesting too is that, we have this maybe not global, but at least far-reaching understanding of oneness, right? We've recognized the interconnectedness, or at least intellectually, and yet, all right, so we're all one. What's that mean, right? How does that trickle down and through us individually? Um, the experience I had, we spoke of on your show earlier, of the awakening I had in college, that I came back understanding we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into form, just unaware. Well, that was the first time I had experienced that, so I had to go find corroboration. And the one place that I found it was in the Vedas, which are like 15,000-year-old Sanskrit poems. And essentially what they say is the same thing. We're divine threads incarnate, connected to source, capable of God consciousness. Now we hear that, especially in the West, oh, that's blasphemous. Well, if we're creators in embryo, if we're sons and daughters, then what are we when we grow up? There's this natural progression of things. That doesn't mean we're all, the all-powerful creator of the universe. It means that we are in charge of our own lives and the reality that we create, and that we have infinite intelligence available to our specific life path and the curiosity that we have towards it. Do you find that to be true also?
Absolutely. Even in the Bible, right? In the beginning was the Word.
Mm,
That ability to speak creation, everything that we say, everything that we put out that makes sound, sound is a creative energy. And so,
spellcasting.
exactly, exactly. And
Yeah,
so,
we're witches and warlocks and don't even know it, right?
but it's true when we talk about that in the image of God, it's not that God looks like this.
Right.
In the image of God, in the image of that source energy is that ability to create, that ability to bring forth, that ability to manifest things in our experience. And
Hmm.
what ends up happening is we manifest the experiences that we hold on to. And so what I'm, when we talk about where we're at any given moment in life, if we're focusing on the things that are really hard and the things that are difficult and the struggles that we have, that's what we end up staying in.
Hmm.
Versus if we are able to bring in that gratitude, if we're able to bring in that love, even when things are really hard, we have capacity for that other energy to be in
Sounds
our
like attention
experience.
and awareness combined, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a new transmission come through and it's almost ready. It's called Spheres of Consciousness. And so, there's all of this in so many different traditions. They talk about these ladders of consciousness and how we can go from, fear down here to, love or joy up here. And there's this whole concept in the world today that we somehow, have to be always up here and we have to have our vibration up here. And so all of these other experiences are bad and we can't have them in our experience. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, but we're here to have a human experience. And so we can't negate a whole part of who we are in order to think that that's what ascension is. That's not at all what
Mm,
that really means. And through this new model of having a sphere of consciousness, we recognize that those dense core energies are always there.
hmm.
But as we expand out from them, we learn new ways to deal with them. It doesn't mean that they absolutely disappear and they're not a part of our experience anymore, right? It just means that we've expanded and our capacity has shifted.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean that we don't ever get angry or upset or that we don't still have difficult things that we have to deal with. But our
Absolutely.
way of navigating it shifts and changes.
And it also gives us the opportunity to observe ourselves, right? That self-examination, the mirror that you mentioned earlier, that we're kind of afraid to look into because of what we might see. And yet the whole notion of self-love is to embrace all of that without restriction, without judgment or condemnation or criticism of ourselves first. And unless and until we can get to that place, we can't really do it with others fully, right? There's always something amiss or something that we're resistant to. And it seems like there's so many different systems that edify what you were talking about, the scale, right? From solfeggio tones, one of them, Hawkins scale, spiral dynamics, all of these kinds of layers. And then there's the Nepean-Close's theory of everything paper, triadic dimensional distinction, vortical paradigm that says consciousness, space, and time are tethered across 9 dimensions. Doesn't eliminate the others, just said this is our human bandwidth. Then there's the experiential side of that, the multiplane awareness technique that was developed by William Swigart back in the 50s. And that takes a person through 9 planes of consciousness, integrates your body on each of those planes, which, that sphere, right? So there's these different vibrational layers that ultimately, when you ascend, it brings a certain amount of release from the self-deprecation of those 70,000 thoughts a day that we have, that 90% of probably, self-deprecating, that begins to diminish. And the more we increase in vibratory level, the more conscience we have and the greater moral fortitude perfection we have in that, where it's completely life friendly and we don't do anything that could damage another. Um, Now, in those frameworks, let's understanding that, all right, then we've got the extraterrestrial side. Are you ready to go there?
Sure.
Right? Now, we call them extraterrestrials. I think it's more intradimensional
Mhm.
because of the way that they're able to navigate. And they have a higher vibratory rate. Different races have different vibratory rates, all of them higher than ours, because they get the understanding of the universality of things, that it's all energy. Now, how have you noticed in your work that those who have come in contact with that in various ways, shapes, and forms, how do they deal with that? What are the kinds of things that come up that are challenging their previous belief system and confronting them in some ways to rise above it?
Mhm. Well, I can speak from my own experience with this. I recently channeled my previous life as a Lyran during the Orion Wars. And so that's the other book that I mentioned that is in editing and, almost ready to come out. And one of the beautiful things that came through with that was our own multidimensionality and how we have, we think that we're just here and this is it. And yet we are on all of these other dimensions, but we also have a piece of us in all of these other lifetimes. And so many of us have those lifetimes as these other interdimensional beings.
Hmm.
And what is absolutely fascinating and what's come through for me, what's challenged me the most, is to recognize that I have access to this other energy. And when I allow myself to tap into that, everything about how I show up now changes.
Hmm.
It
You got
allows for
another
that
reference point.
expansiveness. Exactly. Where we can stay in the denseness and in that energy and allow that to just be our only experience. And there is a piece of, shall we say, ego death that has to happen in order to make that surrender, right? Like we were talking about
Sure.
earlier,
Right.
that
Well, in
piece
perfect
of
love,
saying,
there is no fear, and the fear is of death, right? Of the separation.
mhm,
And yet we've separated ourselves, right? Unbeknownst, right? Now we're in the process of learning how to go back home.
mhm.
In that, what do you find are some of the overarching things that people that you've come in contact with your work with Beyond Being Human, what are the challenges that they face within themselves first, and then also within their immediate circles.
Specifically with the
The
if they're
challenges
seeing
of
or
an
in general.
experience beyond human,
Hmm. Yeah, one of
beyond the third dimension as well, whether it's
yeah,
through a interaction with an interdimensional or through the exploration of themselves and finding that void within that, really has to me the same sensation as the light, right? Everything, it's all one, and yet you're still individuated in it.
yeah, absolutely. And maybe it is that individuation that is part of the biggest issue that shows up for people because they do feel alone in
Mm.
those experiences. When we begin to shift and change, even at a molecular level, through these different experiences that we've had, we don't always relate to people in the same way.
Rarely do we, right? That's what makes them think we're so weird because we're talking about stuff that really, they don't have a direct experience of, so it's incomprehensible to them.
Mhm,
In most cases, unless you have an open mind that's willing to at least have a thought experiment of the possibility.
mhm.
That's still rare.
Yeah,
Um, we're so used to being in this physical world and thinking that everything's linear, and it's just the opposite. Nothing's linear. It's all non-linear, and most of it's non-local still because we haven't recognized just how connected we really are
absolutely.
across the spectrum.
Well, and even that non-locality, we have so many people, and especially because I work in the field of mental health, I deal with a lot of clients who are highly sensitive, people
Hmm.
who are very empathic. And we are told that if we have that sensitivity, there's something wrong with us, right? We're too sensitive to the things around us. We get overstimulated too easily, all of those kinds of experiences. And also, if we don't understand how to differentiate an experience, we sit in it and think it's ours. And our mind has this beautiful capacity to just take it all in and make up a story about it so that we can own it and suffer from it.
Right.
Right. And so we have to learn how to navigate that so that that doesn't become our pattern and our reality.
Well, and what's that take? That's the curiosity, the questions, right? Is this me? Is it something else? What's really going on? Where is it in my body? Is it in my body? Am I thinking these things? Is it real? 99% of our fears are never actualized, and yet we
Mhm.
still have them.
Yeah, it's true. One of my favorite sayings is open and curious. What else is possible here? What is it that I need to explore to understand this better? If I think I know, can I let go of that knowing and just see what else is there?
Hmm. Now, the thread I asked about earlier and all the different areas that you went into, religion especially, it seems to me that our core is really about loving and being loved. That's the energy. That's the
Mhm.
unconditional place of pure, perfect love in which there is no fear, as we're told, right? How does that relate to this obsession on self-deprecation that we tend to have? And what have you found are some of the ways to navigate through that?
Love really is the foundation, and love is also the answer to that question. When we feel that self deprecation, it's because of the conditioning that we've experienced in the world. We have relational frame theory. We have to compare ourselves. Everything is this arbitrary comparison that happens in here. And remember, the mind is here to keep us alive. It's not here to keep us happy. And so, what we end up doing is it's constantly going, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, I don't meet that standard, and I don't know if I can compare to that. And da, 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 da. So, it's constantly trying to figure out where it's safe.
Hmm.
And because of that, that becomes our programming. And that was what we operate from. So, we get into these places where we just beat ourselves up
Sure.
because the mind is trying to keep us safe, not realizing that that's actually hurting us.
Yeah. So you got this supercomputer that's sitting on your shoulders that's got faulty programming, right?
Absolutely.
So how do we wipe the hard drive
Mhm.
and restore a better operating system? And is this beyond the mind, obviously? This is where, I wonder when you are working with the folks, do you get them down into the body to feel what's going on? Because this is really, if everything's vibration, which we know from quantum physics now, and there's an old indigenous philosophy of three brains, right? The gut, the heart, and the head. The gut has trillions of neurosensors, right? More than the heart, I believe. And so it's connected to all the vibrations. The chakra is another Hindu version of the same thing, right? You're connected. You feel everything, even though you may not be aware of it. Then the heart gives the opportunity to discern whether it's desirable or undesirable. It's kind of a Taoist thing, right? And then, and only then, do you take that to the head where you can make choices based on the clarity of the information you've just received from your body?
Yeah.
Now, how do we understanding that, and I see the nod of your head, right? So it makes sense, right? How do we incorporate that? How do you incorporate that with the folks that you're working with, and how do you incorporate that understanding in yourself? Because I know you have.
Yeah, the biggest piece with all of that is to become the observer, right? This is the part of getting out of the mind and gaining awareness of what is actually happening in the body.
Hmm.
And so much of the world today gets into these places of dissociation where they're not even connected to the body anymore and they have no idea what's going on in the body. And so we have to do different somatic practices and things like that to bring ourselves back into the body
Hmm.
and work on allowing ourselves to be okay with an experience, even if it's not comfortable.
Well, and
And
even don't the uncomfortable places where you grow.
absolutely, yes.
You put yourself because it's new territory, right? There are things that are there that you're unaware of, you don't know about, you're probably frightened of,
Mhm.
because you don't know what you're going to experience, and most of us don't like change, right? I
Yeah.
love it. For some reason, I'm one of those anomalies, and not really an anomaly. I just learned that it's good for you, right? So embrace that. It may be uncomfortable at the time. However, once you recognize the process and the path and the cyclical nature of it, you know what's on the other side is going to be something really tremendously useful.
Yeah. Well, and we do have this fear of change. I remember reading this a long time ago and it stuck with me. But the idea behind it is that our perceived level of difficulty plus our level of resistance equals our level of suffering.
Mm.
And we recognize that if we look at a sensation, a feeling, an experience and go, oh my goodness, this is too hard. I don't want to feel this. We suffer greatly.
Buddha says suffering is optional. Right.
Yes. We can go through an absolutely difficult experience that is, I mean, I've had those experiences that are heart-wrenching where I just allow myself to wail and feel the feels of it, and then it dissipates,
Yeah.
right? But it is that allowance and that understanding that it is going to end. It's
Well, it's
not
the
going
energy flow, right? When there's no resistance, when you allow yourself, and this kind of sounds woo-ish, but to be present, right?
to.
And recognize what's going on within you, and just be okay with it. This is evolutionary, maybe not evolutionary, it's a maturation process that I believe many learn through age, and yet, it's like the systems that we have with the body, mind, spirit, planet, and cosmos, right? Those are relationships that we have, and as we gain wisdom, we recognize those. Well, since we do, why aren't we teaching that to our children instead of the programming that we give them, you know, especially in America and West, where we put them in a box and, teach them stuff and then expect them to regurgitate facts and figures or history or whatever, there's really not a lot of critical thinking in there.
No.
How do we restore that? How do we restore the curiosity that has been eliminated by our adulting?
Yeah, when it's interesting. I mean, there was a study done, and I think it was NASA, and they were looking at the genius in children and saw that a large percentage of children actually meet the genius marker. And then they went through school,
Mm,
and that shifted, right? And I think we get to a place now where we're just so used to this is how it is. And there isn't a large, population of people who want to challenge that, but there are some.
right.
And the more that we understand what just letting it be what it is doing to us, the more we can hold space for doing something different.
Hmm.
Right. And it doesn't mean that we can't utilize the education systems and things like that, but we do have to understand what they do, both good and not so great,
Sure.
and then be able to mitigate some of that by working with the kids and helping them to understand what's going on inside of them and how to show up. And I think the best way to do that is to model that for them,
Mm.
right? And as we do that, we hold space for them to do that.
Tough to do when you've got kids raising kids today that have no parenting skills or haven't been taught them. And this is a situation that we've allowed to take place because they're, uh, dual income families that you have to be in order to produce and survive in the world today. So that pretty much begins the disassociation of the family unit. Maybe not destruction, but that also happens too. Now, do you see that this um, openness or this willingness to take a look at those things and begin to reframe how we address it? Do you see things like the NASA study that are being done to promote a greater awareness of this and a shift back to, or maybe not back to, because I don't know we're ever there, a shift to nurturing the children rather than teaching them?
Mhm. I do see that there is a bit of a shift. There is a newer generation too who is stepping up and going, I don't want to follow the same patterns that were there before. As a people, we are a communal people, and yet, especially in the West, we're very individualistic.
Hmm.
And, even to your show,
And
one world.
capitalistic.
Yes. But that idea of one world, we were meant to be communities. We were meant to be in a cooperative place where we work together in order to meet the needs of the
Hmm.
community.
Yeah.
And the
Truly
more,
one world in a new world.
Mhm, yeah, and the more that we move towards that, the more possibility there is for that expansion because there's going to be space for it.
Now, speaking of moving towards in space, we're gonna, and now for something different. What is it? And now for something completely different, right? The old Monty Python line. Hilarious, right? So, taking that understanding, right, and applying it to our what seems to be our natural evolutionary process, right? We've grown up, we've had limited community, they've been separated. Now we've got a global community, everything's connected, and we're still warring amongst each other for resources instead of sharing them. As we move forward, recognizing that we do have one planet, it's sacred, we are sacred with each other in this loving and being loved process. Where is that going to take us? Is this something that fits in with what we're getting from out there of and the folks that you talk with and their experiences? Are we being nurtured to kind of rise to that occasion and recognize that, we really can't fit in the universal family until we can fit in our own family?
Yeah, you pretty much hit that nail right on the head. One of the transmissions that had come in actually recently with the Alliance, Sylvain, who is running the Alliance for Extraterrestrial Diplomatic Communication, and he was asking, what is it that we need in order for them to come? And it is this evolutionary process. We are not ready as it is right now because of the way that we constantly fight with one another.
Mm.
We don't understand what it is to be one world or to have that unification.
Well, there still is the other, right?
Mhm,
As long as we have that mindset that there is an other, we're missing the point,
mhm,
right? In Lak'ech, Mayan, I am another you, right? That's the reason I use that. This is something that ancient wisdom now coming to the forefront, and it seems like it's being nurtured through quantum understanding, which is a really wonderful explosion of new information that, oh, hey, we are all a vibration, we're not material. We, instead of the old 99% space and 1% material framework, it's 100% energy.
mhm.
Now that has to do with the consciousness that we wield in some, right? The awareness, the attention, where we put our attention, intention, and interaction, we manifest, just like you were saying earlier.
Yeah,
What do we want to manifest? Do
yeah,
we want to love and be loving? Or do we want to love and be loved? Well, how do we love? What are the necessary things? How can we define what that example is so that we can live it? What do you find to be in your work the essentials for getting there?
yeah. Well, I like what you're talking about in terms of, what it is we look for, because there is such an integral piece in that. I mean, if you're getting in quantum physics, right, that idea of quantum collapse, and it's not what it is until it's observed. But that
Mhm.
idea allows us to understand too that if we're constantly looking for something to be a certain way, we will eventually see it. And so if we're constantly looking for something negative to happen, we wait until that negative thing happens and then we go, see, that's what it is.
Right.
Whereas if we flip that and say, no, I'm looking for the positive thing, I'm looking for the love in this, I am looking for the joy, for the peace, for the gratitude, that's what we see. And then that becomes where it collapses.
And that's the conscious choice, right? You have to be aware enough to make that choice instead of, it's like you get a new car, right? All of a sudden you see the same car everywhere, right?
Hmm.
That's an unconscious patterned behavior. Now, how do we make that, like Jung says, how do we make the unconscious conscious?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we get into the neuroscience of it, that's the reticular activating system. It's responsible for a sleep wake cycle. It's responsible for what draws our attention.
Hmm.
And so we can train that by consciously thinking about being very intentional about what we choose to want to see in our experience.
And we have that gift of choice to do so. That's what free will is all about. We can choose the other direction. We can choose not to pay attention.
Mhm.
Where's that going to go? Eventually, you're not going to like it,
No.
right? Because we're all about, the life of abundance. The thrivability now is a buzz term, right? In that transformation of intelligence and looking at those things, what I've also found, we're the right and left brain, right? There's been this, historical argument about right brain's creative, left brain's analytical, right? Well, we forget about, and we only focus on those two, right? And so here again, the polarity, right? The polarity paradigm. What about what's in between? Corpus callosum, right? That's the membrane that everything that all the impulses go through as they're switching sides. Now, also with that corpus callosum, at the base of it is the hypothalamus, and at the top of it is the pineal. Now, what about that relationship? Because those two internal organs are associated with the chakra system as well.
Absolutely. And the pineal system is really, it's connected with where we get inspiration and how that energy comes in for us and
Hmm.
where are we filtering it through, right? What is going on and how is that filter happening? What was really fascinating is there was a study done many years ago where they actually split the brain right down the middle. And they did this to see if it helped with seizure patients. But they
Hmm.
realized at the time that they had a really amazing opportunity to study what was going on in the two hemispheres of the brain. And what they found is that it is the left hemisphere of the brain that's responsible for who we think we are, for the individuated sense of self, because it's the part that labels, categorizes, judges,
Right.
does all of
Analytical
that.
part, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's absolutely fascinating is that they found that that part of our brain that decides who we think we are has no like it doesn't care about reality. It just cares about making up a story. So
Mm.
what they had done is they actually showed things to the right side of the brain. The body had a response to that thing, and then the left brain made up a story that it made the most sense for the left brain as to why it had that sensation in the body.
Mm.
And what it really shows us is exactly what we were talking about before, that we don't have to believe all of the things that are going on in our head all of the time. And so, how do we begin to differentiate? Is this just my patterned thinking, or is this an inspiration that's
Hmm.
coming in? Is this something that is connected to the chakras that is allowing me to open to a greater consciousness, to messages from beyond? Or is this my brain just spinning that hamster on the wheel?
Now, are
And
there sensations that go along with that? Because it would seem to me, there's especially with the talk of the chakras and Kundalini and opening to channel, right? That there's a focus in the crown and having it open in order for that divine light, whatever you want to call it, right? There's many words, uh, to filter through and then permeate the body from that direction. Then there's also the opposite, right? Because we're connected to Earth. We are Earth's children. We're made of stardust because we're taking all of our nutrients from Mother Earth. So, that's a relationship we don't really think about either. We think of ourselves as separate from, but yet on a very basic subatomic level, in the nutrients that we get, they're of the Earth. So there's
Mhm.
this also permeating consciousness. So how or is there um, any kind of discussions as to how those two merge in the body? I think the Easterns call it the marriage of heaven and earth in what is it, the hexagram, the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah. I love the Tao. Actually, I was thinking about the Tao as you were talking there. One of my favorite lines,
Amazing.
one of my favorite lines from the Tao, it's 70 or 71, I don't remember exactly. But it says, not knowing is true knowledge. Perceiving to know is a disease.
Mm.
And so that idea of, okay, yes, that inspiration, that connectedness to the heavens coming in, we have to release, we have to empty. And as we empty, universal knowledge can flow through us.
Mhm.
But in order for us to do that, we also have to be grounded, right? And we have to be able to ground into the earth. And Gaia wants to help us do that.
Oh, absolutely. There's a conscious, in the study of consciousness, we have to, in my opinion, look at it's not just us. Planetary bodies have consciousness. That there was an experience I had, I maybe talked about on Twillow Talk, I was questioning the origins of the Trinity, wondering whether, because it's ubiquitous in all the religions, right? Or it seems to be. And so where did it come from? If it's that prevalent, what fractal started it all? And I was going through a multi-level awareness, also Swigard's technique. And in preparation for it, my guide that I'd known since I was a teen, and this is 89, so I was 32, I think. He shows up and he waves, and this is internally. I'm seeing with my inner sight, right? So I see this Indian ancient Indians show up and he waves to me as, and come, right? So I'm used to this process of being able to get out of my body really easily because that's part of what the design of this is. So I was prepped to do so. Upon doing so, we're traveling, through the cosmos or stars going by and then nothing but black. And I'm trying to get an idea of where we're going. I'm having a conversation with them. We end up rehashing the last few years that I hadn't seen him. And, he's kind of giving me a test of okay, what have you been up to? What have you followed? Right? Kind of stuff. And so then we arrive on this three sun system that has a dozen small, really green planets surrounding it on a planar orbit. And the three suns are probably 100 times as big as these smaller spheres. And I feel like Jodie Foster just coming out of the wormhole, tears streaming down my face and the awe of this scenery, right? And then I hear several voices as one say, we are not only your forefathers, we are also the forefathers of your solar system. And I'm like, okay, I want to ask some questions. And I start, right? And then Zephyr says, nope, you got all you need. You'll figure it out. And I'm like, oh man, right? So we come back and I already got the, macro, if it is so, micro, proton, electron, and neutron. And then I'm already thinking, okay, now what doesn't fit in that, right? This is that critical mind. Well, hydrogen is the only one that doesn't. Okay, so hydrogen then, most plentiful gas in the universe, powers the sun and is the bonding agent for our DNA helix. So is it possible that that energy or the consciousness actually travels or is present ubiquitously in hydrogen? I don't know. This is the weird shit that I start thinking about just looking at structure and wondering of the possibilities. I don't know, but sure, there's something there. I don't know what. And yet, this also seems to be one of the things that gets us to look beyond what we have here and the potential of not knowing, first of all, and just asking questions, having an experience, and then wondering, well, what's that mean? Because I, coming back, tried to figure it all out because I had the science and math in my mind and I had the ability to do so. What if I didn't? How would I see that? What would that kind of experience promote, right? Maybe some like the visions and things of some of the prophets from the Bible. I don't consider myself to be one. Some may because of the things I've experienced and been able to report on. It still comes from that not knowing, right? It's just like the void is the nothingness, and a lot of these people from elsewhere, that's where they base their whole reality from, is understanding the nothingness from which everything comes. That's where the word came, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the silence was the word. Well, from the void, we got the light, right? And I always often wonder, is there, like in this point of light that we believe we have at the center of our being, is it just a shell? And is the void possibly what's contained by it? And that through the intention coming out of the void through the light, we actually put the form in process. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. There's a quote from Rabi of Basra, who's a Sufi saint, and I absolutely love it. It says, you know of the how, I know of the how less. That
How about the
ability.
Howlee, right?
But, this has happened so many times in the sense that something has come, an inspiration has come, an understanding has come. The moment that the mind has to then put it into word and speak it, it almost brings it down a bit.
It does. It diminishes it. Anytime we put a label or a category or a definition, it's us attempting to crystallize something we don't understand fully, and yet can at least get it into a reasonable scope of understanding so it gives us some place of solace to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that it is important to be able to have the conversations, but I also think that it is very important to be able to sit with it and to allow it to just integrate without the mind having to try to figure it all out right away.
It would seem that sitting is more important than the activity,
Mm,
because that in that silence is when we're truly available.
yes.
What do you find are good practices to find that silence, especially with those that you work with that have anxiety or are stressed and maybe a little frightful of what's going on in their lives? How do you work with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We talk about meditation and silencing the mind, and that's very, very difficult for a lot of people. And when we're first starting out on a journey, especially if we have this fear of what's going on in our mind or where our mind is going to take us, we don't want to sit in quiet because we're too scared of what is going to
Yeah,
come
we're
up.
social animals. We want a handhold.
But there's a couple different practices that I've found to be very helpful with that. And one of them is super easy, and you can find it online. It's called Leaves on a Stream. And it is a meditation where you visualize yourself sitting next to a stream. And there's a big, beautiful tree overhanging the stream. And the leaves are just falling onto the stream. And every time a thought comes in, you just go, oh, look, there's that thought. And you put it on the leaf and you let it go. And the very first step in all of this is to just recognize what the mind is doing and
Mhm.
release judgment of it. Oh, those 70,000 thoughts, 60,000 of them are exactly the same, 10,000 of them are original thoughts.
Right, right.
Right? And so I'm just putting them on the leaf and
May not
knowing.
be the same, but the same pattern, same general, self-deprecation kind of area where we diminish ourselves, and we've got a bad habit of doing that. So that exercise, that's could be quite profound, I'm sure.
Yeah. It allows for us to just begin to understand what's going on in our mind. It helps us to release judgment of it because we're recognizing the patterns, right? You talk about the computer, it's running a program. We're just recognizing the programs, and we begin to have a bit of separation. We begin to understand that my mind is having all of these thoughts, but they're not who I am. They're just thoughts that are happening in the mind, just like clouds crossing the sky. And I don't have to hold on to them. I don't have to grab them and make a whole story about them and then let that become a part of how I identify myself.
Now, on the flip side of that, you don't have to. However, is there value in tracing where the thought might have originated in order to fully understand where it came from?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. We recognize that there's intrusive thoughts, as an
Hmm.
example. And an intrusive thought can just come in and it's got nothing to do with anything. Maybe we watched a movie 5 years ago and it's reminiscent of that. Maybe it's, a pattern now that has shown up in our mind. And if we begin to identify with it, then we think, oh no, there's something wrong with me. Why am I thinking these things? If we're able to go, okay, that is, I would never want that or think that, we're able to get that separation from it. Then there's
Hmm.
other times where we have that voice, right? That one that tells us how horrible we are. And man, that voice is just like, I don't know, mom, dad, teacher, sibling, whoever,
Right.
right? That's important to know because we want to understand why we have that pattern in our mind. And we want to be able to go, okay, this isn't my truth. This isn't my reality. This is something that I've been conditioned to. And I have, we're back to that word, choice
Hmm.
here. and whether or not I want to keep that narrative as my own or not.
That it sounds like you're talking about the observer,
Hmm.
right? Being able to just watch and not do anything. Now, there's also another, you remind me of my wife and I were meditating out in the backyard one time, and I'm always seeking trying to merge with, right? Because we're twin flames, and we understand that we're always looking for that inner experience that we can have collectively, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm just watching, right? And my mind's having a conversation, and then I'm watching the conversation and I'm wondering about the conversation. And then there's a third voice that comes in with a question. Well, what about this? Or have and those new things that come in that give you that insight because it's there. It's is that like Dr. Laszlo says, right? It's the higher self that we want to aspire to connect with. And that has all of the information that I spoke about, like connected to source, right? That's our
Hmm.
source connection and how we can grow in that connection by being available through learning how to quiet the mind. And you're right, it's not an easy practice. One of the things I've found that it's back in the college days. I was tripping out like crazy, and I was having a moment, right, where I was just, okay, I need to get centered, and not knowing I had my fingertips put together and sitting on my lap, and I started feeling my heartbeat in them. And as I started focusing on my heartbeat, I became aware of my breath. And when those two combined, everything, all the stress, everything that I was feeling that was not present disappeared, vanished. And I was like, wow, maybe that's where prayer came from, right? In its deepest sense, where you're really getting in touch with your own heart and your own breath and connecting with your higher self that way. And when you're focused on the feeling, you're not thinking.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's a beautiful practice too, right? That idea of touching the fingers, because what we're doing is we're making a conduit of energy that stays within us,
Yeah.
right? And so we're able to observe what is happening and notice where we're at and be able to go, okay, within my own energy, I'm okay.
hmm And the really cool thing about that, you can do it anywhere. You can be sitting in a board meeting or in, this contentious, production meeting with all the staff and realize, okay, I just need to take a moment here and center myself. And I've found from my own practice of that you get insights to contributions you can make that take that tension and either eliminate it, diminish it, but it provides a way out into something that brings the people together in their focus toward a common goal. Because most times you have challenges with that if you got personal agendas that get in the way and that aren't spoken of. The hidden agendas, we call them. Bringing those out, recognizing those. Job's the boss. We're here to do one thing. And so we need to figure out how to get beyond ourselves and work as a collective in doing so. And it's not that difficult. And yet, because of all this old style paradigm of competition, which has nothing to do with oneness, we have that understanding of oneness, which has everything to do with collaboration, not competition. How do you find this transition happening in the history of the work that you've been doing? What have you noticed in the patterns that have changed or are changing in the process of this escalation of consciousness that we're all part of right now?
Yeah, when we think about consciousness, I think we all have such different ideas of what that is because of where we're at in our journey.
Hmm.
And so as it unfolds for each of us, I think there is going to be a little bit of a uniqueness in there. And what's been coming to me is that it's about encompassing all of what we are. And we have to be able to hold space for all of what we are, which involves holding space for all of what we all are.
Funny how that works, isn't it?
It's pretty incredible.
It
But
is.
when we notice that, right, even here, having a conversation, that ability to understand that what is going on inside of me is my own filters, my own experiences. And what's going on inside of you is your own filters and experiences. And when we're both able to recognize that, we
Mhm.
actually can connect.
Oh yeah. And
We have,
that's where the intention to connect at that deeper level is what drives us, right? It makes us available to where we have those serendipitous, synchronistic moments like we did earlier. I was talking about the Tao and you, or the I Ching, and you pulled out the hexagram, right? Those kinds of things where it's connected. It's obvious that it is. Now, whether that's an energy exchange, an aspect of telepathy, because we happen to be in that loving space between each other where there's no fear or there's no reason for it, right?
yeah,
We're not here to prove anything to each other. We're here to question and acknowledge and have some fun.
absolutely. And with that intention of just having fun and connecting, we're able to hold space for that in a brand new way without having all of the other things getting in the way. Right? The problem is that we carry so much with us that depending on the situation, we might run into somebody who has a preconceived idea and
Mm,
they operate from that place. And then that does impact us. And
sure.
we have to go, okay, what do I want to do with that?
Right.
Right. And again, it's that choice point because at any point in time we can take on that victim role and we can go with it.
Oh, sure. And yet there's the objective, at least for me, of being of service. And I think that is yours as well. Because you know what you know, we're compelled to be of service. And it's just part of our being. There isn't it's not a matter of choice. It's just who we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
It
Because
may have been a matter of choice at one point in our life, but I'm not so sure.
I don't know. I think for some, there is that flexibility in being able to kind of navigate through. And I think at other times, we come in with this mission, and this is just what we're meant to do. And we know that to the core of our being. And so there's nothing that, even with difficult situations, that's going to take us out of it for very long
Sure. Now,
before we
speaking
get
of
back
that,
in.
this is a really important part that I feel we don't think about enough, let alone the possibility of it. Understanding all of this energy, that there's order, there's a perfect order, let's say. It may not be one we understand. In that, though, if this whole notion of creation, right, that there is a mission, a purpose, a reason for us, is it to the point where on a vibrational level that we have a specific form, fit, and function in the world that we can acquiesce to by our release of attachment to it? Understanding it's there, right, is the first step, right? Because I think most of us, why am I here? What's the purpose? Well, once you can love and be loved, then what? Is there another layer of materialization, for lack of a better, that then leads us to the breadcrumbs that allow us to express the skill set that we've developed in a completely new way that actually edifies the whole instead of detract from it. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's possible, and I'm doing my best to be an example of it, and hopefully figure it
Yeah.
out. Right?
Well, and what comes up for me with that is this idea of, are we operating from here or are we operating from here? Right?
Mhm.
Because if we're in flow, we're not searching for the breadcrumbs. We are navigating through life and we're noticing the breadcrumbs. And we just go, oh, okay.
Nice distinction.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so it makes a big difference in how we have this experience because, I mean, it's true. So often people are going, okay, well, what's my purpose and how do I fulfill my purpose?
Right.
We're never going to find it or fulfill it that way.
Well, and that's the push and pull of energy from that place, right? Where the other is flow. You're not, it's a natural course of action. You don't have to think about anything other than your intention.
Mhm. Yeah. And so if I'm intending to just walk and flow with love, anything can unfold from that.
Hmm. Sweet. Jennifer, this is just, this has been a wonderful conversation. We're needing to ascend into another space. Um, what can you, do you have something that's just a burning desire to share for personal advice to others
There-
that they can engage?
Yeah. There's a Rumi quote, not the one behind me, although I love that one too. But there's a Rumi quote and it's exhale only love. If
Hmm,
we could engage that, we'd have a completely different world.
that's powerful. That is truly powerful. What a way to close. Thank you so much. Oh, and on that, namaste and in la catch. Thanks for sticking with us for this episode. Don't forget to go to planetarycitizens.net and get your free copy of the book. And for Jennifer and I, thanks so much again for sticking with us, and I'll see you next time.